Good afternoon, folks. Today is March 14th, 2023, and we're out here in front of our compost pile today. And I want to talk to you guys about composting with chickens. So we compost all of our organic matter that we can. All of our leftover food that the chickens don't eat or that we can't feed to the rabbits go right into our compost pile. Nothing goes to waste here on Nutty Gnome Homestead. So what you see behind me is part of our compost pile that is close to a year old, maybe a little over, and the chickens are going through here. They do this every day. They come through here, they dig through the compost pile, get whatever little bits that they can. They turn it over, they deposit droppings, essentially feeding the compost. So we also do the deep litter method in our chicken coop here on the homestead, which is you add a bunch of organic matter, you mix it up with the chicken droppings, and then you just keep adding more organic matter, and as they turn it over and scratch and break it up, they keep depositing droppings. You turn it over. In about 6 months, it'll be nothing but a fine powder. We like this method because it does the majority of the composting for us in the chicken coop, and we don't have to work too hard to get it out here to this point. So every 6 months we clean out the chicken coop, we throw it in the compost pile along with our raked up leaves, pine needles, and every other organic piece of material we can get. And what we end up with is this black gold. Let me turn you guys around here for a second and I'll show you what we're dealing with. So what you see here is part of our compost pile and some very happy chickens. They're going through here, they're scratching it up, they're turning it over for us. They're doing a lot of the hard work for us. The part over here on the right is approximately 18 months old. Right here in the middle is 12 months old. And this over here is all of the leaves and everything that we raked up in the last 6 months. So what we do is we continually turn one pile over into the next pile, turn that one over into the finished product. And we can end up producing a little over a cubic yard of compost annually on our homestead, which is pretty cool because this stuff goes into all of our raised beds, into our garden, our potting soil mix that we told you guys about. And these chickens, like I said, you guys can see them doing all the work here for us. They're scratching, they're turning everything over. They're doing a really good job of doing the manual work for us. So I'm going to bring you guys in here close. And as you can see, most of this stuff is broke down pretty good. You have a little bit of grass left in there that the chickens have scratched around into the finished pile. But as you can see, all these girls are over here, they're scratching everything up, they're turning it all over. They're doing all the manual labor for us. If they weren't here to do this, you just take a pitchfork, shove it in, and turn it over. Do that every couple of weeks. You want to make sure that your compost pile stays hot and moist. If it stays warm and moist, you're going to get pretty good compost in a relatively short period of time. If your compost pile does not have the proper amount of nitrogen, like your chicken manure, your green grass clippings, or so on and so forth, you can add more nitrogen in various different forms. Since we're here on the farm, we like to use chicken manure. We do put rabbit manure or rabbit urine in here when we have it, but usually we sell that stuff separately. You can take alfalfa cubes, soak them in water, and mix that into your compost pile. My brother over at Ashmore Arboretum just did a video not long ago on heating up a compost pile with alfalfa. It works really well if you got a compost pile that is stagnated. Now, these girls, they're in here digging around. They'll find worms and bugs and all kinds of stuff. This is a good, healthy compost pile. And I wish you guys could actually see this. There's no smell to this. If your compost smells, there's something wrong. Either you don't have the proper amount of carbon to nitrogen, or you've got an anaerobic environment. You want to make sure that this stays well aerated. So get out here, turn it over. I'm letting the chickens do the work for me. As you can see, they're doing a pretty good job. Or I'll come out here with my pitchfork and I'll turn this over a couple of times. And you don't have to do it too often. Every couple of weeks, turn it over, make sure it stays nice and fluffy. You'll notice that in just 2 or 3 days after you turn the entire thing over, it'll be nice and fluffy and stand up 2 or 3 foot tall. It'll shrink back down. My chickens here, you can see them scratching it out. This was up about 4 foot tall this morning, and as you can see, they are over here kicking this compost out almost 3 foot on both directions. So, and for reference, guys, this here, from over here to where the leaves start, is about 10 feet. So, and that was about 3.5, maybe 4 foot tall this morning. We'll scoop it all back up here in the next couple of days. They'll actually have this raked out flat in about 3 or 4 days, and then we'll rake it back up and start all over again. But no matter what we put out here, whether it's watermelon rinds or tops from our strawberries or anything, they'll come out here and they'll dig through this and turn it over. They'll get out the little bugs and the worms, and all they're doing is they're producing black gold. You guys can see this is real light and fluffy. We've been working on this side here, like I said, is close to 18 months. Chickens have scratched some grass up into this side, but that's okay. It'll all break down. Like this stuff here was on the other side earlier. You can see that color. Dark brown, black, doesn't have any smell. It actually smells kind of sweet. Earthy compost. Doesn't smell bad at all. If your compost pile is not moist enough, you can water it with your garden hose or a couple buckets of water or whatever you have. If you're going to get several inches of rain over a couple of days, you guys can see I got a tarp back there. I don't want this saturated to where you can just wring out water when you grab it. It gets that way, it can get anaerobic real quick, and then it'll just sit here and fester and start to stink. We don't want that. So if we're predicted 4, 5, 6 inches of rain, I'll actually cover my compost pile to where it doesn't get saturated like that. I like to be in control over how much water this gets. We know how much nitrogen we put in here, how much carbon we put in here. We try to get as many leaves, small sticks, like some of our rose clippings from last year. These will actually sit over here and bake in the sun and start to break down. We'll break those up this year and put them in the compost pile, and next year they'll be gone. So there you have it, folks. Work smart, not hard. If you have chickens, let them do the composting for you. Let them do all the hard manual work. If you have to get out there and turn it over, it's not too terribly difficult, but it just takes a little bit of time. One thing you'll notice, though, is I don't have any eggshells in this compost pile. Our eggshells get dried, crushed up, ground up, and they get used in our garden. Eggshells are set apart separate from the compost pile. You throw an eggshell in this compost, it'll get broke up into little pieces, but it'll take years for it to actually break down into a usable form of calcium for your plants. So we have better uses for it. And of course, our chickens like all the free food that they get out of the compost pile. So what are some things that you can and cannot compost? Some things that you cannot compost are anything that's high in fat content, like beef fat, pork fat, bacon grease, anything like that you don't want to put in your compost pile. Mainly because it's going to attract animals such as raccoons, possums, coyotes, etc. And whenever they defecate in your pile, they can be introducing a lot more parasites. You don't want anything like that. You also don't want to put anything that's got a lot of ink on it, like paper from cardboard or whatnot. I know plain cardboard is okay to get cut up and put in here. I'm old school. That's the way we were taught, not to put anything with a lot of plastic coating or any ink on it. We try not to do that into our compost pile. However, there's most things made out of carbon can be composted. Any kind of leaf or yard litter, whether it's small sticks, branches, leaves, pine needles, any of your clippings from your plants, leaves, rose clippings, etc. When we go through and we prune all of our tomatoes and peppers in the garden, it all gets thrown right out here in our compost pile. All of our chicken litter gets composted. All of the rabbit litter that doesn't get sifted and used will get thrown out here in our compost pile as well. So you want to make sure that you keep a pretty good healthy ratio of carbon to nitrogen. An ideal ratio of carbon to nitrogen for your compost pile is going to be approximately 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. What that means is for every 1,500 pounds of leaves or whatnot, whether it's wood chips, leaves, broken down pine needles, etc., even torn up newspaper or cardboard, you're going to need 50 pounds of nitrogen, whether that's chicken manure, urine, any sorts of nitrogen, green grass clippings, any source of nitrogen that you have access to. You're going to need 30 to 1 of carbon to nitrogen for a proper recipe for your compost. That does not mean that if you don't have that, it's not going to break down. It's just going to take longer to do it. You can get compost effectively in small batches in about 5 to 6 weeks, but you're going to have to stay on top of it and make sure your ratio is accurate. You're going to have to turn it on a regular basis and make sure it stays moist. It is a lot easier to make compost in the spring, summer, and early fall than it is in the late fall, winter, and early spring, whenever it's still cold. That's why you'll see we'll keep ours covered to keep the extra moisture off if it's going to be raining for several days. Some people actually put their cold frames over top of their compost pile. Acts like a mini greenhouse, keeps the heat in, keeps everything nice and warm, breaks everything down. One point I do want to hit on are wood chips from electric companies. Wood chips by themselves take a lot of nitrogen and a long time to break down. If you put wood chips directly into your garden, it's going to suck all the nitrogen right out of your garden for at least a year, probably 2. So what we like to do is we like to compost our wood chips for about 6 to 8 months before we use them. They're going to start breaking down. They're going to need the most amount of nitrogen right at the beginning to break down. And by doing that, letting them sit for 6 to 8 months, whenever we do put them in our garden, in our walkways or whatnot, it's not going to draw so much nitrogen out of the soil away from our plants. You could add extra nitrogen to a pile of wood chips, such as chicken manure is great. It's high in nitrogen. You can use cow manure, horse manure. You got to be careful with, because of the grazon that they spray on the hay. I have had experience with manure that was tainted with herbicide, and you will know real quick whether or not you can get something to grow in it or not. So take your wood chips, mix them up with something high in nitrogen, whatever you have, and they will break down relatively quickly. A pile of wood chips will get hot enough to nearly ignite if you don't keep an eye on it. Keep them moist, keep them turned over, keep them well aerated, and it'll break down in a relatively short period of time. Some people will actually use spores from mushrooms in the mycelium to help break down wood chips. We don't do that here on the farm. We like to use things like what we have available, our chickens essentially. They are our workhorses here on the farm. They'll actually turn the ground over for us when we put them into the garden. They do the majority of the work for us. So I appreciate you guys coming along, talking about this compost today and how we use our chickens to do our compost pile. If you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message or leave a comment down below. If you like this kind of content, like, share, and subscribe. If you guys have any ideas or any recommendations for future videos, let me know and I'll see what I can do. Till next time, I appreciate you all joining us and y'all stay safe.